Thank you. I should point out, Elizabeth, I appreciate you shifting the order around. The reason why I have to fly is my son's birthday today. He's turning 8, so I'd really like to be there for his party this afternoon, so apologies to those. I've messed around with my timing. So the subject of the session is the create the internet of your things, and there's an interesting addition to that phrase, which is the addition of the word your, and I'm going to explain a little bit about why we at Microsoft are of the strategy, or that approach to thinking about the Internet of Things. My personal view is the first mistake we made was calling it the Internet of Things. What we've done, we've immediately categorized it, boxed it up, and said it's all about these things. The things are the way we're going to solve the world. The things we have, the better it's going to be. The reality is things will come, things are an important part of this, and obviously we're here today to understand the impact and importance of that. As many of you will understand, whether they be dumb devices generating lots of data, smart devices generating small amounts of data, the bottom line is what they're generating is data. Lots and lots of data. And the value to anybody, whether it's private sector for the Internet of Things, is in what do you do with that data. How do you use the data? How do you analyze the data? And then how do you bring that data back into the ecosystem so that it delivers back to the citizens or to the business or to the provider of that data? So Gartner has a very, message about what the Internet of Things is, and you can read it there for yourself. And whilst, yes, absolutely, it defines the very mechanical process of what the Internet of Things is, I don't think it really, it doesn't take us to a point where we think individually, wow, if I could I could do amazing things. And what we really want to get to the heart of is, yes, underlying this is physical devices getting to the technical world, but what does that mean? What can I do with that information? How will it change what as an individual, as a citizen, as a consumer, in my business or in my personal life? So I'll explore some of that. So why is IoT suddenly everywhere? In reference to the Honourable Turnbull who was here earlier on, and he started stealing my slides. He didn't go back far enough. Yes, in 1990, that was going to be my question. I was going to have a quiz, there was going to be prizes, but Malcolm already announced it. In 1990, yes, the first device was connected to the internet. It was a toaster. In 1991, John also added a mechanical robotic hand that could be controlled over the internet to pop the toaster. First iteration didn't do much. But the truth is, IoT started back in 1965 when the SCADA first came into foray, supervisory control and analysis, which was a very industrialized mechanical model for determining the physical state of an object, a conveyor belt, a physical infrastructure device, feeding that into a compute cycle to understand the real-time nature of that data. So it started a while ago, and we have to be very cognizant of the fact, I think, we talk about how, particularly we as in IT and the IT industry, how we think we've just created this whole new thing. The Internet of Things, it's going to be amazing, guys. Most people have been doing this for 20, 30 years. The example I think I heard Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, I mean, in 97, yes, you did some work with those guys. But organizations like Coca-Cola have been investigating the physical nature of devices and how to analyze it and understand it for many, many years. They just haven't connected to the internet and called it an internet-connected device. But the principle and model has been going for a very long time. And yes, the phrase was coined, people started talking about the Internet of Things as a real thing that we could do, but what's really driven it in the immediate term is a couple of things. One of which is, yes, proliferation of these sensors, and we can all go into JCar tomorrow and buy a whole bunch of 50-cent sensors for ultrasonic sensors, temperature sensors, and any hobbyist can go and build a product or a technology or a solution to solve a specific problem, and that's fantastic. The other thing we've seen in this space, of course, is the Fitbits and the physical devices that we're all willing to consume and put on our physical being because we see some value in the data they provide. Whether or not they're connected to the internet, whether they're just connected to my phone, we still see that as a connected device and consider it to be part of this Internet of Things experience. The other piece is the cloud, which is another phrase I hate. I've sold the cloud and I've sold Internet of Things at Microsoft, and I hate both phrases. The cloud is really just another word for pay-as-you-go computing. And what it really means is it democratizes the cost of high-end computing. It means that anybody, a small business, a large business, can get their hands on the kinds of technology that is transformational in the kind of services they can deliver. And that's the really important part here. And it's not just about low-cost, high-scale computing. There's also another aspect of this cloud piece, which is, and I didn't put logos on there too, in the case we're being filmed, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, any of those vendors that have developed cloud-based solutions which we all use, our kids all use, and generations beyond us will continue to build our entire digital lives on those platforms. And what's happened is we have passively accepted the fact that anything I do, connect, talk about, share on the internet is fine, is fair game. It's shareable information, it's shareable data, it's a shareable system. It's almost it's an opt-in system. I choose to be connected, I choose for everything, I like to be connected. The smartphone I carry in my pocket knows everything about me. I'm happy for that situation to occur. And we've built, and the millennial mindset has built this idea that IoT is just suddenly something that I see value and I want it. I don't care about the privacy issues, I don't care about controls, really about where my data goes or anything else, because if I get a value out of it, if I get some end goal out of this that says that's a bit of information that's valuable for me, I'm almost willing to sacrifice that, the flip side of that. And it's that combination of a point in time, an age group, technology availability. It's got us to a point where now Internet of Things is something that businesses are scrambling like crazy to figure out how they fit into it, because it's where the market is, it's where the business is. And that's from a commercial perspective, but certainly in the, in the government and citizen space, citizens are experiencing this every day in their personal lives, and they're craving governments to deliver services to them that feed into that model and work in that model. So we're kind of at this inflection point. Costs are dropping, components are becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to deploy, use and buy. The cloud services are there and they're relatively easy and cheap to consume. Device options are expanding daily, and this is something we are specifically seeing here in the Australian market. We know as a country we are tremendously strong innovators. We have a huge amount of organizations that are think tanks, that are innovation groups, that are just there to hack and tinker and think about ideas. And they're just looking for a market, a way to sell that, a way to get their thinking, their tool into a market. More machines are talking to each other, and that's a natural evolution of infrastructure and technology. And people are starting to see the economic benefits. Microsoft commissioned a report towards the end of last year into the Australian business specifically. So we targeted sort of the 5 and above employee ratio organisations, 300 plus organisations across a raft of industry sectors. And whilst the data told us that the numbers of people actually doing what we would call IoT, and by that traditional definition we saw earlier, were quite low, about 26%, so really only a quarter of those businesses were doing what they called IoT. Those that were doing it were recognising between, it was about 25 to 40, somewhere in that variance, was the cost benefit savings. So basically they've seen a material impact to their cost of doing business as a result of deploying that system. So there's definite economic benefits in there, but it's early days, very early days in the commercial sector. So what do we think is the right way to go about this Internet of Things? And I feel like I'm saying this in deference to every great speaker that's been on before me and everyone that's going to come after me, because we're all talking about how we can connect everything and we can kind of look at all the possible areas of data to bring into our system. Our view is, let's start with what you already have. Look at what data is already being generated. When we think about what the Internet of Things is, we assume it's a connected device, a thing, it's fine. If I get somebody to fill out some paperwork, do a survey, if I get a whole bunch of citizens, employees, whatever it may be, to fill out some paper, and I put that data, and I put it into a computer on the table there, and then I generate some computer data, and I put that into a system, is that any less of a connected part of an infrastructure system? Yes, the data originated on paper, but it's an internet-connected device. No good. Is that better? Ah, geez. Did you hear any of that? Should I start again? Hopefully the slides told the story enough. That is a lot louder, isn't it? So the thinking being is start with what data you already have. It's very easy to get caught up in this concept of the Internet of Things and start thinking, well, okay, what could I put a sensor in? What could I do next? And I think the problem we have there is we don't really start to think about what's the end point. We don't think about what are we trying to solve here? What is the problem I really could deliver a solution on? We start thinking about what are the things I could connect to see where we go from there. There was a great example this morning talking to some of the people in the room here around where we've seen the smart wireless systems going around town in Adelaide, I believe is the one we referenced earlier. Putting in these wireless hotspots around the city, it's a fantastic service to the citizens, and it's a great service to tourists as they come into towns. That's a great start, and it doesn't necessarily solve a problem, it's a good starting point, but then we start to think about, well, what are we going to do with that data? Because that data now becomes very valuable. And the other thing to think about with an Internet of Things approach is, it's not just your data that's valuable, it's other people's data that's valuable to you too. So as we all start to create data and create big repositories of information, where you might be thinking you're gathering information that is of no value to your business, so you kind of put it on the scrap heap of just store it and keep it for later, to some other industry, to some other business, to some other sector, that data could be goldmine. It could be super valuable information when intersected with more data to present a better picture. So think about the data you already have. Think about the services that are already generating information. We know already, and Mr. Turnbull mentioned it, and other people have mentioned it, most governments already have huge amounts of data in repositories. The challenge is getting to that data, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next section. But we're not afraid of the things. The things will come. We know that the innovation will appear and devices will get created. But for most organizations, just start with a small achievable goal. I hate the phrase, but it's a good example of this, which is, fail fast and fail early. But try everything. Try little things. Figure out what you can do with it. It's cheap and it's easy to do it today. Before you start investing in huge amounts of infrastructure to do the next big thing, think about what you already have. And so, as we slightly get into the Microsoft product pitch, but I'm trying not to do a product pitch because I was told not to do a product pitch here. You already have the things. Most governments already, and organizations and councils, and everybody has some things that are generating data in some way. You already have all that data sitting in disparate or controlled or locked down repositories or God forbid, Excel spreadsheets. What we want to do is help you take that data and industrialize it. Put it into a position where it can be utilized across a broader scale. And so we have what we've announced as our Azure IoT services, which is a set of components within our Azure cloud, which is our public cloud service running nationally and internationally, to provide you with the ability to connect the dots on Internet of Things service. Because one of the things that, the most important part of that Internet of Things story is, apart from the data, which I've already said, is the internet bit, the connecting of the pieces together. And as you take a small factory of innovators in Manly, New South Wales, coming up with a great idea, and they want to take that national and then international and globally, you need infrastructure behind that. You need an industrialized platform that can provide you the conduits to let your thing talk to the other things and users within the world. So a couple of key points that I want to look at there, and I'll talk a bit about some of the engines that deliver IoT as a service in the cloud. So we think about efficiency, and I don't need to talk about these in detail. You've mostly heard other people speak about them in terms of how they impact smart cities and efficiencies of city services. But connecting data between different city services is just a simple first step. And I understand, and I'm not privy to that level of data access, but I understand one of the biggest challenges in government and in between interagencies is just the control barriers around who owns the data, what are we going to do with the data, and what happens if I let the data seep out. Do I lose control of that data? I need to maintain some management of that information because it's my data and I have a responsibility to that data. But starting to monitor and track the health of state assets, of objects we have, in order to start doing that, when we start getting into things like escalators, lifts, doorwells, everything about a physical public building or any kind of commercial building, there's so much data being generated, you can't just quickly cobble together an infrastructure to let that come through and drive that information in real time. What we're building in the Azure cloud is an infrastructure that supports that high-level, high-scale growth of connected devices, but without the massive cost implications of getting into that first day. So you're buying by service, you're buying by event, you're paying a few cents every time you generate an event, but the economic scales fit with a growth model, not a big bang, we must invest heavily and then move forward from there. So if we think about what we're talking there, we're just talking about event ingestion. Data comes in, we look at the data, and we spit out some result with the data. It's a very near real-time process. Data flows in and out of the system. And that's a very simple, straightforward model of IoT today. It's largely what we see as being the core of an IoT platform today. This is where the next step's going to be. Thinking about decision-making. This will be the differentiator. It's one thing to say, I can read the temperature of that sensor, and I can take that temperature and display it on a dashboard so that everyone can see it today. When we think about what are you going to do with that data and what does that data mean in the context of the bigger picture, weather patterns, traffic patterns, state of the nation, people's emotional state, employment numbers, all of those things that might layer on top of that, that's when we get into the world of machine learning and looking at data from a different perspective, making sense from nonsense, looking at huge amounts of unstructured data and trying to figure out where the patterns are. It's a newly emerging market within the private sector, particularly. The concept of the data scientists and the chief data officer as an entity within an organization that is purely and primarily focused on understanding the next step, the prediction of where our business should be and what our business will look like. And I'm going to give you a couple of good examples of that towards the end from a couple of stories we have. And of course, the other piece that I believe, and again is a real differentiator in what we should be doing with Internet of Things, is we tend to think about the Internet of Things as this concept of a thing, generate some data into a service and we deliver it. But Internet of Things is a closed loop. The data's got to have a gravity back. It's got to find some reason to exist. When you create some data, when you create some insight, when you create something new out of your predictive learning, what are you going to do with that data? How are you going to bring that data back into the cycle so that it actually has an impact on, in the private sector, the cost of doing business, or in the public sector, so that it actually impacts the citizen such that the citizen actually wants to participate? Where's the value? How does the citizen say, if I give you all this data, what am I going to get back out of it so that I'm willing to complete the circle and keep putting data back into your system? So from a slightly different perspective, because we heard this mentioned a couple of times, I think Mr. Turnbull mentioned it, and it's been mentioned, I think Stephen mentioned it as well. From a Singapore perspective, there's no challenge with governments creating data. Lots and lots and lots of data, structured and unstructured. And I'm very much aware of the efforts that are going on here in Australia to standardize some of that data, and looking at the CCAN model and looking at open data or data models to provide some consistency of that data such that it is beginning to get to a point where it looks and smells and feels the same, and we can start to do something with that data. So how do we get more value from that? Right now, individual agencies, individual departments will publish and take data, and they'll push it out in whatever way suits their business at that time, whether it be Excel spreadsheets, comma-separated files, or web APIs, or whatever it may be. But we've got this proliferation of various models of data delivery, making the data available. There's no consistency to it, and where there's no consistency, it's very difficult to build a business around that. And so the point we're looking to suggest here is, if we as a vendor can provide an infrastructure, a wrapper around your data, a tool set that enables you to take control still, so the data is still yours. What you choose to publish through that API is your choice. But in order to access that data, there's a nice secure layer around it, an open standard secure layer around it. It's robust. The data will always be there, the platform will always be there, the service will always be there. When you get to that situation, with all the data that governments are generating today, what you start to open up is an interesting new idea, which is, now you've got a commercial model. Now governments have a whole bunch of data that is valuable to somebody, and whether that is somebody who is a small business that is just looking for more information and more insight into their market, or more importantly, the wealth of Australian developers and people that are looking to build new technologies. When they have access to that data and they can trust in that data and they can believe that that data will continue to be there, they will build a business around that data. They will have the confidence to build their business around the data that you're providing, and ultimately what that means is they can start building the apps, building the services that reach your citizens. The tools that they're going to be using will be whatever devices citizens are already using, but you close the loop on this Internet of Things problem. And in fact, what you do is you create a circular loop. You get to a situation where the consumers start feeding more information back into the Internet of Things loop. The data becomes cleaner, becomes richer, and becomes more powerful, because now we're getting real-time data from real users, and we're driving a digital economy here in Australia. We're giving small businesses an opportunity to build a business around the data that government's holding today. And whilst that may not necessarily fall under the category of Internet of Things, it drives that digital economy in Australia, which will drive an Internet of Things market here in Australia as we grow and build our small business community, which represents, as you all know, a significant sector of the Australian commercial market. So, in the risk of repeating myself, the right strategy is, start connecting the things you already have. You don't need to go out and connect a whole bunch of other stuff. It's perfect timing. Combine the data you already have and start to look for new insights into that, and expand the loop. Expand by adding new assets and services as you've done those first steps. I'm not going to talk too much about our particular services because I have a couple of minutes, and I really want to share with you a couple of stories, because I think this really kind of helps to humanize the situation of how IoT is driving change and how people are thinking about IoT in their businesses. This is a fantastic example from Europe, actually. It's a fast food company who have an outlet based in a train station, in a large European station. Unfortunately, I don't know the name of which one. And they were looking at how to grow and drive their business. Now, you think in the fast food market, what would you do? Is you'd say, well, okay, we either, we raise the price of burgers, or we do a 2-for-1 offer, or we do a package meal deal, or we put a toy in the box and then the kids will come and buy it. That's wonderful. But they didn't look at the problem that way. They said, we've got to grow our business. We're in a high foot traffic area, lots and lots of people coming through our stall, but there's also 40 restaurants next to us who all serve food as well. And what they did was they said, well, let's think about this. Where are we? We're in a train station. What do people do in train stations? They come and they go very quickly. So what they did, they said, okay, let's tap into what's stopping people from coming to our shop. And the end result was, they said, they actually bought a large, huge digital screen, put it above their store. They tapped into the rail system's data on train arrival and departure times, and they simply put a new menu up on the board that said, Berlin, burger, chips, shake. And as the train for Berlin was getting closer to its departure time, the burger would drop off the menu, because you haven't got time to get a burger now. You've got time to get shake and fries. And as the train was getting closer, that would all drop off and you can get nothing. And Berlin would disappear. And then Dusseldorf, or whatever the station was. I'm trying to think of good German names. But it's such an interesting approach. And what they were basically tapping into is the problem was people weren't not going to buy a burger because they didn't want to buy a burger. They weren't buying burgers because they just didn't trust that they had enough time, because time was precious for them and they were running on trains. They didn't have enough time. So they looked at that problem in their market and said, that's the problem we've got to solve. If we give them confidence they can get the burger, then they'll come into our store. And it was just that simple mental connection. If they'll tell me I can get it, I'll go and buy that burger because I trust them. And is that an Internet of Things solution? Well, we connected somebody else's data to a digital device and displayed that information, got a closed loop on that, and delivered a change in our business. Just a fantastic lateral way of thinking about solving a business problem with digital solutions. And the last one I'm going to share with you is from another of our European colleagues, which is the lift manufacturer ThyssenKrupp. I've only just learned how to say that correctly. I hope that's close enough. So ThyssenKrupp, as you know, make lifts, generate a lot of business in lifts, and as many of you would know, as cities grow up and not out, lift business is good. There's really no challenge in them selling more lifts. That is not the business that they're struggling with. For a lift company like ThyssenKrupp, the challenge is maintaining lifts. Lifts have a very long life cycle, high-risk product. If your lift falls, people die, it's not good. So you need to make sure your lift operates correctly. And so we worked with ThyssenKrupp and we built a platform for them with our Azure service to connect all of the lifts. So they already had sensors in lifts, but you have to, the support guy has to go out on site, plug into the lift, check the status of the lift and go, right, okay, that bearing needs fixing, that bearing needs fixing, let's do it. You take that data, it was already there, so using the data they already have, plugged it into a cloud service and brought it back into a central site. So now it opens up these whole new ideas to them. First thing was, they realized, of course they knew, they would have 10 lifts within 40 meters of each other in a high metro area. Each of those lifts has a maintenance schedule, and typically, I think it was mentioned earlier on, traditional maintenance models are deploy it, and then 3 months later go back and fix it, and then 3 months later go back and fix it, regardless of what the state of the lift is. You just got to get on top of it, so you maintain it. So now they had the data that told them what the lift was doing and whether it needed repairing. So now they could action it. But also now they knew there were 3 lifts around the corner in the other building that also needed repairing. So now we go and we do the lift repairs for all 4 lifts at once in one trip. We don't think, well, we'll just stick to the schedule because we've got the schedule. We understand the nature of the problem now. We understand where the lifts are failing. We understand where we're getting issues. We can massively reduce our transportation and transport costs as we move people around the country and around the world to repair those lifts. Now, the other net effect of that was, of course, and this is where we're now going with ThyssenKrupp on the model, is predictive. So now when I start to see scenarios of when the weight in the lift is this, and the number of people in the lift is this, and this bearing happens to break down, that's a set of scenarios that if we see that happening in other places, we can get predictive about it. We can actually get the guy out on site to repair it before the lift breaks down. Because, of course, when a lift breaks down, that's largely too late. That's the challenge for an organization like ThyssenKrupp, is they don't want lifts breaking down because that's bad form in their product. So again, just a great example of how a company that you'd think their focus will be, how do I sell more lifts? How do I stop Otis and Schindler and all those other guys? That wasn't their problem. Their problem is, how do I reduce the cost of maintaining my product so that my product becomes the product that people want to buy? So with that, I'm going to leave you with, no, I'm going to press the right button, yes. Those couple of thoughts. I think that, it's an interesting time, and I think that it's very easy to get overwhelmed by the concept that the way to solve the problem is with things. The things will come. Think about the data. Think about the value of the data, and think about how you're going to use that data to solve a goal, solve a problem, or help a citizen. And that's the starting journey for us. Thank you.